Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious was an English bassist and vocalist, most famous as a member of the influential punk rock band the Sex Pistols. Vicious joined the Sex Pistols in early 1977 to replace Glen Matlock, who had fallen out of favour with the rest of the group. Due to intravenous drug use, Vicious was hospitalised with hepatitis during the recording of the band's only studio album Never Mind the Bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols. Accordingly, his bass is only partially featured on one song from the album. Vicious would later appear as a lead vocalist, performing 3 cover songs on the soundtrack to the great rock and roll Swindle, a largely fictionalized documentary about the Sex Pistols, produced by the group's former manager Malcolm McLaren and directed by Julien Temple. During the Sex Pistols' brief chaotic ascendancy, Vicious met eventual girlfriend and manager Nancy Spungen, and the pair entered a destructive codependent relationship based on drug use. This culminated in Spungen's death from an apparent stab wound while staying in New York City's Hotel Chelsea with Vicious. Under suspicion of having committed Spungen's murder, Vicious was released on bail. He was later arrested again for assaulting Todd Smith, brother of Patti Smith, at a nightclub, and underwent drug rehabilitation on Rikers Island. In celebration of Vicious' release from prison, his mother hosted a party for him at his girlfriend's residence in Greenwich Village, which was attended notably by the Misfits bassist Jerry Only. Vicious' friend Peter Kodak assisted him in procuring heroin, and he died in his sleep after overdosing on it. Less than 4 weeks after Vicious' death, the soundtrack album of the great rock and roll Swindle was released. On 15 December 1979, a compilation of live material recorded during his brief solo career was packaged and released as Sid Sings. Gary Oldman later portrayed Vicious in a 1986 biopic entitled Sid and Nancy. Early life. Vicious was born John Simon Ritchie on 10 May 1957 in Lewisham to John and Anne Ritchie. His mother dropped out of school early due to a lack of academic success and went on to join the RAF, where she met her husband-to-be, Ritchie's father, a guardsman at Buckingham Palace, and a semi-professional trombone player on the London jazz scene. Shortly after Ritchie's birth, he and his mother moved to Ibiza, where they expected to be joined by his father, who it was planned would support them financially in the meantime. However, after the first few checks failed to arrive, Anne realized he would not be coming. Anne later married Christopher Beverley in 1965, before setting up a family home back in Kent. Ritchie took his stepfather's surname, and was known as John Beverley. Christopher Beverley died 6 months later from cancer, and by 1968 Ritchie and his mother were living in a rented flat in Tunbridge Wells, where he attended Sandown Court School. In 1971, the pair moved to Hackney in East London. He also spent some time living in Clevedon, Somerset. Ritchie first met John Lydon in 1973, when they were both students at Hackney Technical College. Lydon describes Ritchie at this time as a David Bowie fan and a clothes hound. By 17, Ritchie was hanging around London. One favourite spot was Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's then little-known clothing store, Sex. There he met American expatriate Chrissie Hynde before she formed the Pretenders. Though at least 5 years older, she tried to convince Ritchie to join her in a sham marriage so she could get a work permit. John Lydon nicknamed Ritchie Sid Vicious after Lydon's pet hamster Sid, who had bitten Ritchie, eliciting Ritchie's response, "Sid is really vicious." The animal was described by Lydon as the softest, furriest, weediest thing on earth. At the time, Ritchie was squatting with Lydon John Joseph Wardle, and John Gray, and the four were familiarly known as the Four Johns. According to Lydon, he and Vicious would often busk for money, with Vicious playing the tambourine. They would play Alice Cooper covers and people gave them money to stop. Once a man gave them $3 bob and they all danced. Yet the darker side of Vicious' personality emerged when he assaulted NME journalist Nick Kent with a motorbike chain with help from Darwobble. On another occasion at the Speakeasy, he threatened BBC DJ and Old Grey Whistle test presenter Bob Harris. The Flowers of Romance and the Banshees, an incident with the Damned. Vicious began his musical career in 1976 as a member of the Flowers of Romance, along with former co-founding member of The Clash Keith Levine and Palmolive and Viv Albertine, who would later join the Slits. He appeared with Susie and the Banshees playing drums at their notorious first gig at the 100 Club Punk Festival in London's Oxford Street. According to members of the Damned, Vicious was considered along with Dave Vanian for the position of lead singer for the Damned, but Vicious failed to show up for the audition. Vicious later contended that Vanian and associates had intentionally withheld information regarding the audition as an act of jealousy. Too unsure, Vicious did not arrive. Soured by the experience, Vicious held a personal grudge for this perceived slight perpetrated against him by Vanian and the Damned, a grudge which would become violent during the Damned performance at Day 2 of the 100 Club Punk special, the day after making his debut drumming with Susie and the Banshees. An intoxicated and amphetamine-fueled Vicious hurled his glass at the stage. He was attempting to strike Dave Vanian as an act of retribution, but the glass missed, shattered on a pillar and partially blinded a girl in one eye. Vicious was arrested the next day and imprisoned at Ashford Remand Centre. Westwood sent him a book about Charles Manson to keep him occupied during his imprisonment. Solo career. With Spungen acting as his manager, Vicious embarked on a solo career during which he performed with musicians including Mick Jones of The Clash, Sex Pistols, bassist Glen Matlock, Rat Scabies of the Damned and the New York Dolls, Arthur Kane, Jerry Nolan and Johnny Thunders. He performed the majority of his performances at Max's Kansas City and drew large crowds, though some performances were hellish, especially when Vicious insulted some of the audience. Examples of this can be heard in the in-between tracks on his live album Sid Sings. Guitarist Steve Dior said in the documentary film Who Killed Nancy that he got good money for those shows. His gigs at Max's would turn out to be his last performances as a solo musician, as well as his last performances ever before he died the following February. Nancy Spungen's death and murder charge. On the morning of the 12th of October 1978, Vicious claimed to have awoken from a drugged stupor to find Nancy Spungen dead on the bathroom floor of their room in the Hotel Chelsea in Manhattan, New York. She had suffered a single stab wound to her abdomen and appeared to have bled to death. The knife used had been bought by Vicious on 42nd Street and was identical to a 007 flip knife given to punk rock vocalist Stiv Bators of the Dead Boys by Dee Dee Ramone. According to Ramone's wife at the time, Vera King Ramone, Vicious had bought the knife after seeing Bators. Vicious was arrested and charged with her murder. He said they had fought that night, but gave conflicting versions of what happened next, saying, "I stabbed her but I never meant to kill her," then saying that he did not remember, and at one point during the argument Spungen had fallen onto the knife. On the 22nd of October, 10 days after Spungen's death, Vicious attempted suicide by slitting his wrist with a smash light bulb. He was hospitalized at Bellevue Hospital, where he also tried to kill himself by jumping from a window shouting, "I want to be with my Nancy," or other similar words, but was pulled back by hospital staff. In a November 1978 interview, he said that Spungen's death was meant to happen and that Nancy always said she'd die before she was 21. Near the end of the interview, he was asked if he was having fun. In reply, he asked the interviewer if he was kidding, adding that he would like to be under the ground. At Bellevue, he was visited by his lawyer James Marburg, who did everything he could to keep Vicious out of jail. Subsequent arrest for assault. Vicious was charged with assault after attacking Todd Smith singer Patti Smith's brother at a Skafish concert at Hurrah in New York dance club. Vicious was arrested on 9 December 1978, and sent to Rikers Island Metro Jail for 55 days to undergo a painful and enforced detoxification. He was released on bail on 1 February 1979. His bail was originally set at $50,000, but lowered after court hearings and negotiations from his lawyer, Malcolm McLaren. The Sex Pistols' manager worked to raise money, and the bond was eventually covered by Virgin Records. John Lydon has stated that Mick Jagger stepped in and paid for Vicious' lawyer, and has praised Jagger for never seeking any publicity for this death. On the evening of 1 February 1979, a small group of friends, which included Jerry Only of the Misfits and future D-Generation founding member Howie Pyro, gathered to celebrate Vicious having made bail at a friend's Manhattan apartment at 63 Bank Street in New York City. Vicious was clean, having been on a detoxification methadone program during his time at Rikers Island, but at the dinner gathering, Vicious had his friend English photographer Peter Kodak deliver him some heroin. He had apparently spent hours during the party looking toward the future, planning an album he would record to get to his life and career back on track should he be acquitted. Vicious overdosed at midnight, but everyone present worked together to get to him up and walking around to revive him. Vicious died in the night and was discovered dead by his mother, Anne Beverly, early the next morning. In the book Please Kill Me, The Uncensored Oral History of Punk by Legs McNeil and Gillian McCain, Vicious' close friend photographer Eileen Polk said that no New York funeral homes were willing to hold a funeral or burial for Vicious due to his reputation. His remains were eventually cremated at Garden State Crematory in New Jersey. According to Eileen Polk, Vicious had stated during his life that he wanted to be buried with Nancy Spungen. Spungen, who was Jewish, is buried in a Jewish cemetery in Pennsylvania. Vicious' mother Anne Beverly later traveled to Spungen's family's home in Philadelphia and asked Spungen's mother if she could scatter Vicious' cremains over Spungen's grave. Spungen's mother denied the request. Polk said that Jerry only drove Beverly and her sister and two of Vicious' friends to the cemetery where Spungen was buried, where Beverly scattered Vicious' ashes over Spungen's grave. Howie Pyro, who also went along with the group to scatter Vicious' ashes, said in a 2009 documentary that he felt Spungen killed herself and Vicious was innocent. "To me, she just did it to herself because that's what people like that do. Like teenagers who cut themselves." Pyro said that he thought Spungen was desperate for attention and stabbed herself thinking Sid would come to her rescue, but that he was too intoxicated to do so. Suicide claim and mother's involvement. Shortly after Sid Vicious' death, his mother Anne Beverly claimed that Vicious and Spungen made a suicide pact and that Vicious' death was not accidental. Beverly claimed that, after Vicious was cremated, she found a handwritten note in the pocket of Vicious' leather jacket. It read, "We had a death pact and I have to keep my half of the bargain." Please bury me next to my baby. Bury me in my leather jacket, jeans and motorcycle boots. Goodbye. In the pilot episode of documentary series Final 24, NYPD Police Sergeant Richard Houseman revealed that shortly after overdosing, Vicious wanted another dose of heroin, and Beverly went into the bedroom. In 1996, Beverly confessed to journalist Alan G. Parker that she had then purposely administered a fatal dose of heroin to Vicious, because she knew that he was afraid of going back to prison, and had doubts about how good his lawyers were, even though the lawyers were certain they would clear his name. In an interview sometime after this documentary's broadcast, it was revealed that the show's production team lied to Parker to obtain his confession. Parker later directed his own film Who Killed Nancy, to set the record straight. Musicianship. Though regarded by many, including Steve Jones, an original Sex Pistols bassist Glen Matlock, as a talented vocalist, Vicious' abilities as a bass player were debated. During an interview for Guitar Hero 3, when Sex Pistols guitarist Steve Jones was asked why he, instead of Vicious, recorded the bass parts of Never Mind the Bollocks, Jones responded Sid was in a hospital with yellow jaundice and he couldn't really play, not that he could play anyway. The only song that he played on in the studio was Bodies. Vicious asked Lemmy, the bassist of Motorhead, to teach him how to play with the words "I can't play bass," to which Lemmy replied, "I know." According to Paul Cook, in the few months between joining the band and meeting Spungen, Vicious was a dedicated worker and tried his hardest to learn to play. Indeed, this period was Cook's favorite in the band. Viv Albertine went further in defense of his ability, saying that one night she went to bed and Sid stayed up with a Ramones album and a bass guitar, and when I got up in the morning, he could play. He'd taken a load of speed and taught himself. He was so quick. Keith Levine, a member of the Flowers of Romance with Vicious and later a member of The Clash, and then Public Image Limited, also recounts a similar story. Could Sid play bass? I don't know. But one thing I do know was that Sid did things quickly. One night, he played the first Ramones album non-stop all night, then next morning Sid could play the bass. That was it. He was ready. I told you Sid did things quickly. Hall of Fame induction. In 2006, Vicious, along with the 4 original members of the Sex Pistols, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, although the band refused to attend. Memorial plaque. In 2014, the town of Tunbridge Wells, where Vicious had lived for 6 years during his childhood, proposed a memorial plaque for famous people who lived in the town for a considerable amount of time. Sid Vicious was one of the people in line to receive his memorial plaque. Many residents were opposed Vicious being memorialized by the town due to his reputation. One resident called Vicious vile and a man who died as he lived surrounded by filth and misery. Tributes. Various bands over the years have recorded songs about Sid Vicious. Former frontman for The Clash, Joe Strummer, recorded Love Kills and Dum Dum Club for the Sid and Nancy soundtrack. In 1986, the Ramones released Love Kills on their album Animal Boy, which was a tribute to both Sid and Nancy. In 1997, US Bombs released their song Ballad of Sid on their album Never Mind the Open Minds. In 2015, UK rock band Medusa released a music video called Sid and Nancy, in which a young boy resembling Vicious wreaks havoc around London, with a young girl resembling Spungen. In 2016, California punk band NOFX put out a song called Sid and Nancy on the album First Ditch Effort. The song details a fictional affair between Sid and former First Lady Nancy Reagan. In 2017, the pop band Foster the People released the track Loyal Like Sid and Nancy on their third studio album Sacred Hearts Club. Biopic. The 1986 UK feature film Sid and Nancy, directed by Alex Cox, portrays the chaotic last phase of their lives, ending with a fictionalised stabbing scene. It starred Gary Oldman as Sid Vicious and Chloe Webb as Nancy Spungen. Oldman's performance was praised as a hugely sympathetic reading of the punk figurehead as a lost and bewildered man-child. Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Would you like to know more?